Us. Really looking forward to our conversation. And let's just dive right in.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me and sharing my thoughts, giving me an opportunity to share some thoughts.
Yeah, well, I'm really looking forward to that. So if you would, give us a little sense of how you arrived at this role as Chief Human Resource Officer at WCG. What is your career story?
People who know me, Dan, and I know you know me well, generally will probably say, among other things, that I'm a planner. But I will tell you, when it comes to my career, I am not a planner. I found myself being opportunistic, unintentionally opportunistic. Up until I graduated from high school, I actually thought I was going to be a teacher. And I remember, as I was talking to the guidance counselors, I don't know if they even still have guidance counselors in high school, but they did when I was there. I remember the teachers telling me that you really should think about a business future, a business degree. Okay, guidance counselors, they're more worldly than me. They're telling me, what I should think about. So when I first started in college, I was a business major because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. And I found probably pretty quickly in my maybe second semester that all these accounting and finance and tax classes just were not me. I'm not wired that way. And so really, it took me about a year into college to figure out that I was probably not sitting in the place that took advantage of my talents. So fast forward, I've always loved to read. I've always loved to write. Spoke with a couple of folks at the school and said, well, why aren't you a communications major? And that was magic. I found my moment. So was a communications and journalism major. I use those skills to these days. That's when I'm in my happy place. And that actually led to my first job at Merck in the public relations department. So I was actually an admin assistant, took it to get my foot in the door, and just have had opportunities to grow into different roles. I have spent time in finance. I actually did a turn in finance because I knew eventually I needed to develop those hardcore financial business skills. I'm not in finance today, but I know enough to get by. And thankfully, I'm surrounded by smart finance people. I also had the opportunity to go work in sales. And there's a lot of communication overlap in sales. And sales was probably one of the best jobs that I ever had when I worked for Merck, because you spend your time talking with folks, listening, trying to understand what their needs are, how their needs are being met, how their needs aren't being met. Those skills last way beyond sales. I think you and I use those skills every single day. So being in sales was life-changing, really, really life-changing for me. And then I got a call from corporate headquarters at Merck. Someone who had been a mentor of mine for many years was hiring for human resources. And it was actually a recruiting role in human resources. And I said, well, I'm not really sure what that is, but let me interview. And I actually came to appreciate that recruiting is sales. You're selling people. You're selling people on careers, a company. And that's where my HR career was launched. And I've since spent my time kind of going back and forth between different HR roles. And I've actually had the chance in my time at Covance to run a business. So I got to dip back into those sales skills, bring those finance skills out of the closet, and then use my HR skills, use all of those things, as you know, when you run a business. So that was life-changing too, because I now was the recipient of all of these HR processes and practices that I had been part of developing. And I remember thinking about some of them, who designed this? So it really changed my view going forward. I always take an outside-in view. I rarely look at things from an HR perspective first. I always look at things of, what's the business problem we're trying to solve? What are we trying to accomplish? What opportunity are we trying to take advantage of? Then we figure out the people part and the finance part and the process part. But those dips into sales and running businesses were key in really, I think, kind of opening my mind to how I approach my HR career. So I know that was maybe a little bit longer than I expected, but it has not been a straight path. And I wish I could tell you that I was so thoughtful and contemplative, I would say that for every opportunity that was put in front of me, I would have to sit back and think, well, what am I going to learn from this? What can I bring and what can I learn? And my gosh, can I actually do this job? So that would be advice that I would have for folks who are very goal oriented and career oriented. Be careful of being overly so, because you may actually miss some stuff going on back here. You're so busy looking ahead. There's some things in the side, your side peripheral view, you may miss that are golden. That would be my advice for maybe folks who are starting off in their careers.
Well, it's very interesting that you went out of your way to understand what the business actually is, what sales actually is. And I would imagine that enabled you when you were interviewing as you grew your career to connect with the highest levels of leadership that were looking at other folks that were interviewing for the job. I mean, did you feel like that just, you stood out a little bit because you could speak their language right away?
I've been told that when I've interviewed for positions, one of the comments I usually hear is, you've got a really interesting, diverse background. Tell me about that. And what I always try to do is I draw from the experiences. And of course, you try to make them relevant to the position you're interviewing for. But I've actually had more than one person in my career say, wait a minute, you work in HR? You don't speak HR. You kind of come at things from a different perspective than many HR folks. And I think that's probably the product of having been exposed to business functions early on. I was in sales pretty early in my career at Merck, and that was a game changer. I mean, you know, Dan, when you're in sales, if you're not achieving the results, it's pretty obvious. You make your numbers or you don't. So you have to figure out pretty quickly, what's the space I'm operating in? What are all the obstacles around me? What are my competitors doing? What are my customers need? What can I bring them? You have to figure this out. And Merck did an excellent job. They had a phenomenal sales training program, but there's just an intellectual curiosity that sits underneath that I think I have, that has probably paved the way for me to maybe show up differently than the traditional HR folks when they're interviewed for positions or any role.
Fantastic. So all of that being said, if there's one thing that you wish you had known when you began your career, looking back on it now, what would that be?
Well, I would tell you two things. Know who you are and know what moves your soul. I'm not trying to be, corny here, but seriously, what moves your soul before the world tries to change both on you. And I go back to that example that I started off with, that conversation with the guidance counselor, when I had these wonderful visions that I'm going to be a teacher. And I love the teaching. There's just a lot of it that jazzes me, and was essentially talked out of doing that. So this goes back to my high school years. And to this day, teaching and learning still move my soul in a great way. And I hope that perhaps a future chapter of my career involves that, because it's still there. It's perhaps unfulfilled. And I think one of the reasons that I love the HR space is because it gives me an opportunity to fulfill part of that. But I think it's, I'm at a point in my career where I know what I like and excel in, and I know what I don't like and I don't excel in. I have figured that out at this point. I wish I knew that starting out, because even though I take something from all of my experiences, I probably could have focused more on certain things if I stayed true to what moves my soul. And I love the saying folks have, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. I truly believe that. I just say it a little differently. And I think there's just this piece that people have to figure out what moves them, and don't overthink it, and try to find that sweet spot of doing something that moves your soul and gives you energy and you can make a living from. That's nirvana.
Terrific. All right, so let's move to the world that we find ourselves in. The phrase that seems to be ubiquitous towards the end of last year and certainly into this is the Great Resignation. So how in the HR community and beyond, and particularly within life sciences, how is that being addressed? And where do you think it comes from? Is it the money? Is it culture? Is it mental health? Is it a stew of all of those ingredients? Like, how do you see it?
Yeah, I think you summed it up in what you said. I don't know that I would point to any one thing, Dan. I think there's just been a convergence of circumstances over the last, my gosh, it's now 3 years we're going into this, right? There's been a convergence of circumstances, and I think it has prompted a lot of people to reflect. I read an article many years ago, some research that people tend to deeply reflect at certain milestone moments in life. New Year's is one of them. Birthdays is another one. Or when they've had a life-changing event, either a death, a breakup of a relationship. Well, I would say the pandemic has been one of those factors. It's given people extended time to think about all of these factors. And I actually saw something on the news this morning. I wrote it down because I knew we were talking. And it was a person talking about, I've reassessed my worth. And I thought that was just a really interesting way. And this was a retail food services worker. This wasn't some corporate executive. This was someone who was being interviewed about, why the food services industry is struggling so much to find help. And they were talking to folks who worked in the space. And I thought the woman said it beautifully. I've reassessed my worth. And I'm now being more deliberate in assessing my options of how I can maximize my worth, and not only financially. I think she truly meant my worth in terms of the whole package I bring. So I think there's a piece of that. I think people are sitting back and no longer just accepting what's being put in front of them, that this is the norm. I think they are now an equal player. I actually think the balance of power, for the first time, possibly ever, has shifted to the talent versus the seekers of talent and the employers. I don't know that genie is ever getting put back in the bottle, to be honest with you. So I think all of the things that folks like you and I spend our lives talking about, providing a great culture, inspiring leaders, seeing value in your work, connecting to the purpose, being paid well, being treated well, and recognized. All of these things, I think, have long been ingredients of a great employment experience. I still believe that today. I think now we've hit this mass inflection point in the masses, where the balance of power, what was the phrase? I'm not going to take this anymore. I forgot who said that. I think it was actually a Twisted Sister song. We're not going to take it. Remember that? I'm dating myself. You're from the 80s.
That's right.
But I think in some ways, this Great Resignation is the work world's way of saying, we're no longer going to stand for what work has normally been. We want to redefine what work is, and we want to redefine the contract between worker and employer. And I actually, it's as much of a headache as it is for me working in HR. We're dealing with trying to fill loads of positions like everybody else is. We're also dealing with attrition and people constantly trying to steal our great people. As hard as that part is, there's also this intellectual part of me that loves watching this unfold, because I'm really keen to see who wins in this market, and why are they winning? What is it that they're doing? Are they doing this stew that you said? Are they using the stew recipe and they're doing it right and consistently? Or is there a whole new set of circumstances out there that I'm missing that hold the magic key? So I think we're still evolving through it. I don't think the answer's revealed itself yet. So I kind of live in this, schizophrenic world of, oh my gosh, I'm losing sleep at night because I can't hire enough people fast enough, with this, wow, this is fascinating to watch unfold.
So a big piece of this, everything you just described, is the hybrid workplace. And I want to put out a prejudice that I have, because I think when you're later in your career, you're in your 30s, let's say, it's easier to be in a hybrid environment, meaning working from home, in the sense that you've already made a lot of connections that grew your career to where it is now. You know the ropes, and you know how to exist in productive way within the organization. But if you're early in your career, you're looking at all the benefits that hybrid brings. You don't have to commute to the office, that you have a certain sense of privacy working from home that you don't have at the office. And that's so tantalizing. And plus everybody's, your entire generation is leaning in that direction. So there's the herd mentality that it's very easy to overlook the benefits of being in the office, because we all know the benefits of not being in the office. We've all lived it, right? But I was wondering if you could delineate, or A, do you agree with that? And B, is in your mind, is there a difference between if you're early in your career versus more established when it comes to the choices that we now have? Because as you put it, it is a seller's market now, right? So the sellers have choices. How should somebody look at hybrid choices depending on where they are in their career from your perspective?
I do agree with that point of view, Dan, because for all the reasons you stated, I know more of what I don't know at this point in my career. I don't know everything. I believe you never know everything you don't know in life. I know this sounds like I'm going in a circle, but it's truly when you're starting off in your career, you really don't know what you don't know. And the fallacy is you think you know. So all of these missed connections that you don't realize until later on, wow, I wish I would have had them. They don't reveal themselves until you're further down the line. So I agree with you. I think it's super tantalizing, all the benefits of working remotely, but there's a whole side of things that early in career folks are missing. And unless we highlight this consciously, I think there's a chance some folks may go through life not realizing they're missing this whole other part of their connections and developments and social networks that are so important in one's career. So I agree with that. But I also understand that it's hard to put this genie back in the bottle. We have proven through the world's largest work from home experiment that it works. So what is the sweet spot? How do we balance all of these things, taking the benefits of hybrid work that we all appreciate? I certainly appreciate it as well. It gives tremendous flexibility, which I think is a good thing, and I don't think we should lose. But how do you restore or create opportunities for collaboration, for networking, for connectivity with a human dimension? And I see this when I go to our offices. Our offices are open voluntarily, so there's no requirement, but there's folks that go in because they thrive on that. And I go in once a week myself. And it's actually really nice to see humans. And you get folks who come and stand in your doorway, who you might not normally see when you're working from home because you now have to schedule an appointment with them. But you see people passing you.
And doesn't that, just to jump in real quick, I mean, isn't that a real limiter? If the only time I talk to somebody is when I schedule a Zoom call with them because there is a purpose behind it, then aren't I missing out on, life is serendipitous.
I agree. I'm an example of that. I mean, I told you at the top of the hour, my career has been serendipitous and opportunistic. And probably a part of them is connections that I forged that I didn't realize would play themselves out down the road. Remember, I mentioned I was in sales and I get this call from headquarters about someone I had known for many, many years. We hadn't connected recently, but she said, we have a job opening. And I immediately thought of you, even though we hadn't spoken in 2 or 3 years. So I agree with you. I think whether it's you happen to just be walking into the building at the same time as someone else, and of course, there's always something to talk about, especially in these days. And I see that, and I hear that from employees, even at WCG, when they go into offices and they actually interact with 3D humans to say, wow, I forgot what this was like. This is really great. Right. Obviously now with Omicron and just having to stay distance, it's exhausting, as you know. But I think there are folks who ventured back to in-person collaboration who've realized there's just an extra dimension here that is hugely beneficial. And part of what I'm watching closely in this new world of hybrid work is how do you capture that? Again, the companies who win, what are they doing that incorporates this ingredient. I know of some folks that are doing what they're calling collaboration days or collaboration spaces. And they broadcast, Wednesday's a collaboration day, come one, come all. How is that working? Even that is limiting. If it's once every month or once every 2 weeks, you still miss those connections, Dan, like I talked about. Somebody's walking past your office, they see the light on, they stop, you're chat in the doorway. Before you know it, you know things about this person you never would have known through a planned Zoom call where you had only one objective. So I agree with you. I think we're missing out on multi-dimensional relationships with just being limited to the Brady Bunch Zoom boxes. And I don't have the answer of how to solve that. I am very thirsty for that answer because I'm a person who thrives on that myself. But I think it's something people who don't know they're missing it yet, let's try to catch it before it's too late. And let's put it back in front of folks, especially folks that are early in career. So I agree with you completely.
So in our world, what we see is, I think, a very interesting divergence, which is some of the senior, actually a good percentage of the CEOs that we work with are still insisting that hybrid is temporary and that you cannot have a corporate culture that is remote or that is mostly remote. And they believe that we will all be back in the office someday, perhaps sooner than we think. And then there's the majority, but not the vast majority, who have accepted this reality and are working with it. So if I were to put you on the spot and say, what's your prediction over the next couple of years? What do you think is actually going to happen? Do you think the genie can be put back in the bottle? Or do you think if you don't adapt to hybrid, you're simply going to lose talent? You're simply going to lose.
Yeah, I would, if I had to predict, because I'm keenly watching this like you are as well. I'm fascinated as it unfolds, and I'm trying to look for signs that show it's going in one direction or another. My bias, only because I talk with employees all the time. I'm a big networker, as you know. I think hybrid is here to stay. And I think companies that insist of the days of old, they're just going to be passed by. You've got a whole generation of folks that have entered the workforce in the last 3 years who pretty much only know hybrid. And so these folks are the ones coming up into the workforce. They're the ones that will be the future leaders of the workforce in 10, 15 years. It's probably no different than our millennials, who never knew life without a phone. You're just not taking that away. That's kind of like saying, okay, put the phone away and go back to your rotary phone and your Walkman and your, just your network television. Forget about streaming. This is how people are being formed. It's their formative years. So I think between that and just the amount of hybrid work in the workplace, those are two powerful forces. It's kind of like trying to fight back the waves in the ocean. You just
Sure.
ultimately, I don't think you win. How do you adapt? How do you ride the waves instead of getting wiped out by the waves? So I think companies who figure out a sweet spot of how do you allow hybrid, but make it productive that also promotes your culture, those are the companies that are going to win. And what is that secret recipe? The companies that are experimenting with the hybrid, the 3-2, the collaboration days. I think the results aren't fully in yet. We are just normalizing how to work in this way. I don't think we've yet begun to understand the impact, the longer term impact. It's kind of like a clinical trial, right? You have masses of people in these clinical trials and you're getting data. And just like with COVID, you're trying to analyze the data real time. In our world in clinical trials, there are just certain things that you just need the longevity of the study to really draw deep, insightful conclusions. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we're there yet. I think we are in the world's biggest clinical trial, both from our vaccination, clinical trial, as well as the remote work or hybrid work clinical trial. And I think the deep, deep insights are yet to reveal themselves. So you've got a lot of people making predictions, which I love. And I always try to look for clues of, is that looking to be true? Are we trending? But it's, I think it still is, it's still got to work itself through.
So with that, what do you look for in aspiring leaders? Given this transitional phase that we're in right now, you've got an organization full of people that are striving to grow their careers. What do you look for most for someone who is perhaps a terrific individual contributor, has great technical acumen, and they want to move up? And that means managing others. That means taking on a broader responsibility within an organization. What are the key traits you look for beyond their specialization skills?
Yeah, of course. I mean, technical skills aside, to me, I have found that there are just certain traits that transcend industry and transcend generation. I wrote an article a couple of years ago on LinkedIn that spoke of CHITA, C-H-I-T-A. And that was an acronym for courage, humility, integrity, transparency, and authenticity. And I still feel, I use CHITA as my acronym. I still feel CHITA is that group of traits, at least for me. When I think about the best leaders I've experienced in my career, what have they all displayed? And when I ask others, describe the best person you've ever worked for, I often hear those traits, the courage, humility, integrity, transparency, authenticity. So I think folks who are being led, number one, just they want their leaders to be real. They want to know, I mean, yes, we want you to know your subject matter expertise, but more importantly, we want to know that you are real. And that number one, you care about me, not only for what I can produce, but you also care about me as a person and you value me as a person. And by you having humility and integrity and transparency, I think that's a way that we show that to people. There's not these pretenses. I remember thinking early in my career, the magical vice presidents who I used to watch, when I was a youngling in my career, and thinking, wow, they have all the answers and they're so smart and they know everything and they're so confident. And now I work with these folks, and when you work in human resources, you often get a glimpse behind the curtain, and you find that everything you believed possibly is really not the reality, and that's okay. That's the important realization. That's okay. That's okay that a vice president doesn't have all the answers. That's okay if a vice president says, I'm nervous about this, or I've not been in this situation before. I'm anxious. That's okay. There's a healthy energy that comes from that. And I think it's when folks open themselves up and they expose their realness that they really allow their people to connect with them. The pandemic has actually been the great equalizer. We've gotten glimpses into leaders' lives that perhaps even leaders didn't realize. I mean, just when you're sitting on a Zoom call and you're looking at someone's background. I mean, I've been on calls with presidents where there's kids screaming in the background and the cat's jumping on the counter behind you and the phone is ringing and you can tell there's just controlled chaos, maybe uncontrolled chaos, and they are just powering through. And there's a comfort there that, okay, I'm not that different. So I think these, these CHITA traits that I talk about, really just, they transcend industry. I think those are the things that help leaders really connect with those that they're leading. And I would probably add to that, just a lifelong willingness to learn. I believe you never figure everything out in life. There's always more to learn. The more you know, the more you come to realize you don't know. And I think leaders who open themselves up and say, I don't understand this, teach me. I actually said that to my team the other day. I said, you need to explain this to me as if I'm 5 years old, because it was a really technical, involved benefits issue, highly technical. And I reread the summary I received about 6 times. And I said, I'm just not getting this. Pretend I'm 5. How would you explain this? And the team did it. And I said, okay, I get it. I understand. And one of the people on the call said, that's a great way to, you know, to invite people to explain things. So just being real and being authentic and helping people connect, people will go to the wall for you if they believe you care and they believe you're authentic and you don't have a hidden agenda. Push aside all these pretenses. That's why my CHEETAH acronym is really grounded in these kind of deep traits of who we are as people versus how many years of experience and I'm a PhD and I'm a VP of this. That's helpful. I need to know the people leading me have some sense of how to run the business. I'm not dismissing that. But for me to really connect with a leader, I look for those traits that I just described. And those are the people that I always go back to and say, how would this person do it? And I try to role model myself after that really small group of people in my life that have been so impactful.
That's terrific. Lisa, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. This is really valuable stuff. I just want to roll the acronym one more time for folks. So it's charity.
It's CHEETAH. So it's courage, C for courage, H for humility, I for integrity, T for transparency, and A for authenticity. And I would kind of put a big circle around that says also just a willingness to be a lifelong learner. I think if you have all of those things, you will naturally have people gravitate toward you, and those people will want to give you opportunities or want to align themselves with you because you're just real. I mean, there's a reason that Brené Brown's talk on vulnerability is one of the most watched TED Talks in history. It's there, you're putting yourself out. And so to me, that is always the way to connect with people. They know you know your stuff, you have your degree, but you know, what's underneath all of that? Who is Dan the person? Who is Lisa the person? I think that's what's lacked in leadership. We have these shells that we're supposed to live in and these ideals that we're supposed to conform to. And I think especially in nowadays, folks just I want the real you. I want to know who Dan, my boss, is as a person. And the pandemic has exposed some of that. Let's get comfortable with it. Everybody's on the equal playing field here. I think it's been a great thing. Not the pandemic, but this new dimension
of course
of people being on level playing fields. That's the part I've appreciated learning about different dimensions of people that I may not normally have seen in the more curated world of office life.
Once again, Lisa, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. It's really very valuable. And we will post a link to your article on the Velocity website.
Oh, perfect. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Don't claim to have all the answers. It's one gal's opinion, Dan, but I love to watch what goes on around me and try to make sense of it. And it's been a really interesting, hard, but enlightening time. And I think the world at work is at a pivotal point. And I'm really fascinated to see what the next generation of work looks like and as it's defined. And I know you spend a lot of time in that space as well.
Terrific. Thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome. Take good care. Stay safe, everybody.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.